anything and everything.
Do you ever wonder how to? Do you ever wonder why?
About anything and everything. Then Doris is your guide. Anything and everything will open your mind. Anything and everything with Doris. Anything and everything with Doris is online. Remember. Anything and everything with Doris.
You are listening to Anything and Everything with Doris podcast. This episode is brought to you by WYSK Spark Radio, the spark of the South. Listen to hits from the 70s to now. Find it on Live 365 Spark Radio. Hello, everyone. I hope you've had a blessed week. We certainly did here in Louisiana. I'm sure you've heard of all the flooding that Louisiana had last week, and that was before Hurricane Barry even showed up. I feel especially blessed since Barry changed course a bit, and we didn't have much of anything from him. I really wasn't going to go any further with this topic today. I had something totally different planned, but that was until an audience member wrote in with a question that Louisianans have been asked a lot over the years. The question is, why would anyone continue to live in New Orleans? It should have never been built so close to the water, and New Orleans was poorly designed, and why don't they just give it up? Let me just say this. Ever since cities have been built, they have been built around water. Water is a necessary element for survival. So it's not the fact that it is near water or even that it is below sea level that causes our current issues. In today's world, we can manage solutions for all of those problems. The issue is with the poor management in Louisiana. Corrupt governing in Louisiana. Greed. While I understand that all governments have some form of corruption, Louisiana is much more exceptional at it, and it has been going on for generations. It's nothing new here. It's so commonplace that it's almost expected. While we have locked up a few politicians to show we know about it, there are many, many more that get away with it, and we can prove it. Politicians here in Louisiana are just plain blatant about it. Yet, while everyone complains about it, they just keep voting them in. You know, I learned a few years ago that not all places actually vote in people. They just get appointed somehow. But in Louisiana, we think we have a better system because we vote them in and they're only allowed a certain amount of term limits, like 2. You have to get rid of them. You know, you have to vote someone else in. And it sounds really good because that way they don't get too complacent and feel more comfortable at not doing their job or stealing or whatever. But here in Louisiana, the voting system doesn't necessarily work. For example, during the last election for the mayor of New Orleans, before this person ran, when she was mentioning that she would run for mayor, very shortly after that, it was all over the news that she was being investigated for using city credit cards for personal purchases during her previous employment as city councilwoman. She even clogged a toilet by trying to flush down the evidence. Okay, so we know she was guilty, right? Innocent people don't need to flush down the evidence of whatever they're doing, right? You would think people wouldn't be interested in someone with a scandal like that. You would think they would say, well, maybe you can try next time if everything turns out okay. But they didn't. Nope, they voted her in. I mean, you had all these red flags, and they voted her in anyway. And it turns out that she is the first female mayor in New Orleans within a 300-year history of New Orleans. So I think they voted her in because they really wanted to see a woman in there. Besides, she didn't even live in New Orleans before she ran. The mayor before her, who served 2 terms, left with an enormous bank account, and everyone knew exactly what he was doing. You've heard of him. He was the one who decided that he could come up with over $1 million to help New Orleans out near the end of his term. He had so many options that he could have used it for. New Orleans has a need for a much better education system. It's really broken. They have roads that need repaired. They have potholes all over the city that are just ridiculous. The crime is at an all-time high. And still, by the way, there's this huge flooding situation. So he had a lot of great options. But he thought it would be much wiser to take down the historical statues that he thought were offensive. Statues like Robert E. Lee, P.G.T. Beauregard, Jefferson Davis, the Battle of Liberty Place Monument, and so forth. It was so sad because the majority of New Orleans residents were against the removal. They felt like it was a slap in the face when the money could have been spent protecting their homes from flooding. At that time, it didn't matter what side you were on. You had people that were totally didn't like the monuments in the statues. They didn't want to be reminded of the history of slavery back then. And then you had other people that were saying, well, leave it up because number one, they're historical monuments. And number two, if you try to bury history, you're bound to repeat it. And besides, these people did great things for the city of New Orleans. And when you say, but they were slave owners, you have to remember back then, even though it wasn't right, for slavery to go on, it was legal. They weren't criminals. So you have to remember that. But we've grown. We no longer have slavery. So no matter what side of that issue you were on, the one thing all of those residents could agree on was don't spend that money taking down these monuments that really aren't hurting anybody and then store them. They got to store them for years. That's not free. Let's fix these problems. Let's make sure our children can have a better education. Let's fix all these roads with potholes everywhere. Let's fix the crime. Let's stop our homes from flooding, for goodness sake. However, he didn't care because his term was ending and he had already purchased $1 million plus home out of New Orleans. That's right. These mayors do such an outstanding job that when they leave as mayor, they even leave the city. After all, who would want to live in a crime-ridden city with streets riddled in potholes that floods at nearly every rainfall that isn't even capable of educating their children? These mayors aren't sending their children to these public schools, so they don't have an investment in it. There are so many potholes in New Orleans alone that there is a newscast that ends every week with Pothole of the Week. Potholes have been there for years, right? In fact, just yesterday, I was sent a picture to my Facebook account that a New Orleans resident was celebrating the pothole in front of her home. She has tried for years to get them to come repair it, and she couldn't get the city's attention. So she decorated it with birthday party decor and said she was celebrating its 3rd birthday. That's right. In New Orleans, we have to shame them into doing their job because we can't just vote them in and expect it to get done. Also, New Orleans residents are now suing the Sewage and Water Board for their homes constantly flooding. Now here's why. They decided to take it upon themselves to open a storm drain that was not draining, and it hadn't been draining for years in front of their homes. They tried to get the attention of the city. They've begged them to come clean it out. They wouldn't. So they opened it themselves, and they found Mardi Gras beads, beer bottles, cans, lots of other trash and debris that had been clogging their drain for years. Some of the drains in New Orleans had not been cleaned out since Hurricane Katrina in 2005. 2005 was the last time a lot of those drains got cleaned out. So my point here is that a lot of flooding issues in New Orleans is not because of how or where it was built as much as it is about the poor management. Many residents asked a question about the contract to clean the drains. Now see if you can figure out what is wrong with this question. They asked which politician is related to the company who won the bid for the contract to clean the drains out. Did you catch that? A regular person who expects a non-corrupt government would have asked which company is responsible for clearing out our drains and why are they not being held accountable? Corruption is the standard here, so much so that they automatically know that someone is getting kickbacks and no one is going to be held responsible. It's hard to feel sorry for the residents when they are the ones who vote these clowns in. Every city has to deal with some sort of natural disaster. California deals with earthquakes and fires. Our northern family deals with blizzards, tornadoes. The South has hurricanes and tornadoes and flooding. The problem isn't even how to minimize it, because where I live, for example, we have levees, or in other parts of the world they call them dikes, and we have pumping stations. The real problem is electing officials that truly care about the city that they are hired to care for more than they are about the money and publicity. Fame and fortune seems to be the downfall with our politicians here in Louisiana. So now you know the real story behind the flooding of New Orleans. And that's our show. Thanks for listening. And until we meet again, enjoy every day to its fullest. God bless. For comments or questions, you can reach us by email at yopi@post.com. Also, check us out on Twitter at Dorisi and our Facebook pages at Yopi Studio or Louisiana Entertainment Association. Anything and Everything with Doris is produced by Your Own Production Incorporated and comes out every week. So come on back. And feel free to add us to your favorite RSS feed, iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Pod, and our favorite, Podbean. All links are found in our show notes below.